Let's welcome one of Portland's favorite sons, Marcelino Alvarez.
Hello, Portland. Let's talk about the future. New York Yankees Hall of Famer and amateur philosopher Yogi Berra once proclaimed, "The future ain't what it used to be." And in no industry is this more true than the Internet of Things. Futurists and science fiction writers in the 1950s wrote about the future with such a nostalgic and idealistic view of what the world could be. In 1955, General Motors in their kitchen of tomorrow, imagine this kitchen where this 1950s housewife had all the modern conveniences of a home. She could wave her hand and make a phone call. A system of rails above her head would move heavy objects from one side of the kitchen to the other, and with the motion of her hand, her refrigerator would open, automatically revealing what she would cook this evening for dinner. Similarly, electric companies imagined a world where cars would automatically drive themselves down a highway, where families could sit and play board games. Here you've got a young child playing with this supersonic jet in the back of his car, mom and daughter playing dominoes while dad lovingly sips on some coffee. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe some beer. He's up to something. And this carried on in the 1960s, where we imagined this world where, mom could just adjust a couple dials and out would come the meal. It might be a steak with some peas, or steak and peas and some corn, and young son in their nice mid-century modern house would enjoy lovely views while robots made their dinner that evening. We were very idealistic in the 1950s. Because instead of that, we got this. A million ways to change the colors of our light bulbs. That's it. It's the Internet of Things. And so how is it that we got caught in all this hype of connected devices and imagined a world that was so perfect in IoT space? Well, the idea is probably really familiar to most of you, right? We've got connected sensors and a rise of mobile computing, and suddenly we've got the ability to connect all these devices to the internet. And born from this rise of sensors is a wave of enthusiasm, a modern day gold rush where people are rushing to build a ton of things that are connected. But the truth is we got a lot of things that we don't really need. The fact that the Internet of Shit exists. Are one of you guys the Internet of Shit owner? No? This is one of the leading sources of information on IoT, constantly proclaiming all these things that we don't need. It has 91,000 followers. That's more than most startups in this space. This is a thought leader. And so this is one end of the spectrum, right? We've got complete parodied accounts of all the things that we don't need. And on the other side, we've got this vision. This is the 1950s vision of the perfect home. Mr. Jetson reading his newspaper because they didn't imagine tablets back then. Food being delivered to everyone, your little space alien collecting it. We've got this on the other side, right? How do we prevent this perfect world from becoming this? A world where a piece of glass sits in front of our face, projecting an augmented reality, allowing us to sip on our sippy cups while we slowly let everything slip on by. How do we build stuff that people would actually really use? And in the process, won't make us lazy. Today I'm going to talk about how I think that IoT could develop. But first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the hype. How did we get here? Secondly, I'm going to talk about the opportunity in this space. Thirdly, the challenges and how we can overcome them. And then most importantly, why Portland? So why the hype? Well, first off, the future is really cool. If we look at this world, imagine the 1950s, we're finally at the point where sensors are going to allow us to connect our devices in such a way where some of this is actually possible. And in so doing, we've had this rise of people who say, I see a pathway to building this, and I'm going to build a company, and I'm going to get rich. And when people want to get rich, investors see the hype and the enthusiasm, like, oh, we want to get rich too. And so they invest in these startups thinking, if those guys are really enthusiastic, we can build on it, we're going to get rich. And then companies who are a little bit behind the curve on this, well, they want to sell newer versions of their product. And so they want to get rich too, and they get behind the investors and the startups trying to build their things. So numbers for everybody. So 6.4 billion devices are going to enter into the world this year in 2016, and that's projected to go up to 20.8 billion devices by 2020. The economy around this today alone, the services economy around IoT, is around $235 billion. According to Mattermark, one of the leading kind of startup research companies, there are almost 1,000 IoT startups in the US that have raised $10.3 billion. And if you think of those investors that want to get rich, that imagine 10x returns on those companies, it's about $100 billion worth of valuations in those companies. This is one of my favorite infographics in the world. It is the Gartner hype cycle that talks about new technologies and kind of what happens to them. And so usually there's a technology trigger, right? In the case of IoT, we have the rise of cheap sensors. We have the ubiquity of mobile computing, and we have the rise of the convenience economy. We've got Instacart, Amazon now. We have things that get delivered to us within an hour. We want everything just to work and get connected. And so this leads to the investors and the people who are wanting to get rich. And we slowly rise up this peak of inflated expectations, only to slowly fall into my favorite phrase, the trough of disillusionment. IoT is at the peak of this, because at the trough of disillusionment, that's where we start seeing things like the types of companies that the Internet of Shit Twitter account parodies falling into as they kind of fade away. But slowly, the second and third generation of those companies and those devices will emerge, and we'll kind of hit this slope of enlightenment, ultimately kind of reaching a plateau of productivity. And if you think for a moment about your mobile devices and where cell phones may have been 10, 15 years ago, it followed a similar curve, right? The first generation Nokia devices were very much a technology trigger. We had Snake on our mobile phones. We're like, this is great, we got Snake. 15 years later, we got an app store. And so it was a slow rise, right? A slow rise from the promise of you're going to be doing mobile banking, you're going to be connected to the internet, you're going to do everything on your phone, to the point that we actually got there, where Samsung and Apple, Android and iOS came to fruition, to the point where our parents could use our devices without having to call us for tech support. There were it was a precipitous fall from the peak of inflated expectations. Sorry. So, why is it that we're here? Well, first off, few people are asking the right questions. Like, who's actually going to buy this stuff? And are we actually solving any real problems? And the most important one, what happens when someone can hack into my blender? It's going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. So, too much hype actually leads to solutions in search of a problem. This is Cuvée. It positions themselves as a smart wine bottle. It is a bottle with an LCD screen on it. You have to buy their wine bottles through them that are in aluminum containers. They ship them to you. You place it inside this glass bottle, and the sensor inside the bottle then tells you what wine it is, and it pours a little bit of a glass of wine based on what you input into it. That's too much work. I just want to drink my wine. This is a connected crock pot. We have taken the simplest kitchen appliance in the world, and we've made it complicated. Why? Check the status of my crock pot. It's still cooking. Great. It's not going to burn, I assure you. The chili will be fine. This is the Juicero. Juicero has raised $120 million on the promise of delivering you fresh, squeezed veggies that come in this metal-looking pack that gets FedExed to you. It's a $700 appliance that promises to be the Keurig of juicing, only if you live in the state of California at the moment. $120 million. And this is Toots. Toots is an Internet of Things connected unicorn that farts rainbows. I'm not making this up. It's on Indiegogo right now and is a third of the way to its funding goal. Please don't invest in this. We don't need this. No one needs this. I don't care if it only farts if it's got good news. No one needs this. Portland, I see an opportunity. I really do. Because no one is winning IoT. Not Apple, with their HomeKit and the retail section of their store that shows a bunch of connected light bulbs. Not Alphabet, not Google, not Nest. not sure if you paid attention to the news, but a few weeks ago, one of the companies that Nest acquired, Revolve, was deprecated by Google. And in a different fashion than what normally happens when a piece of hardware is deprecated, they didn't say, hey, we're going to stop supporting this in a little bit of time. They just said, hey, we're turning it off. And that really punishes your early adopters, the people who believe most in your product. And so this gentleman, Arlo Gilbert, wrote a thoughtful piece about the time that Tony Fadell, the founder of Nest, sold him a container of hummus. The Revolve actually looks like a container of hummus, in case you're wondering what the joke is. But it's a warning call, right? If you're building devices and you're one of the early adopters who most believes in this space, the companies that you become an advocate for at any given point in time can just disappear. This is Samsung at CES, where they put a 22-inch TV screen on the front of your refrigerator door so you can see what's inside your fridge. Posted without comment. And then Kickstarter, where a lot of IoT hopefuls hope to build their companies, build their products, and hopefully sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll actually receive those. So why is it that we got here? Why is it that there's so much hype and yet such little realization of this space? First off, if you're a startup and you're trying to raise money, you have limited resources. And your investors, your board directors, they're all telling you to focus. You're focusing on one small part of the problem. And the problem is that you can't just solve one small part of the problem. Because the IoT is an ecosystem. There are more parts to this than just the light bulb, or just the lock, or just the sensor that goes outside your door that tells you if your dog is standing out there. You need to solve a much bigger problem than what your funding will allow. And so you hope, whether it's via Kickstarter or via funding, that you eventually get acquired, that you have an exit, someone else buys you so that you can join a team that is then solving other parts of the problem. But that's not the outcome that most of those startups have. If you're one of the bigger players, if you're Apple, if you're Samsung, if you're Google, you're making a platform play, right? You're trying to build an ecosystem of software products that others can be acquired and kind of folded into. And the way I like to think about it, it's kind of like mercury poisoning. All these little IoT startups are kind of like mackerel floating in the sea, and they're all consuming some level of mercury. And it's fine if you eat a mackerel, right? You're the consumer, you buy an IoT startup product, you're kind of like eating a single mackerel. And that's fine. You're like, this might work, it might not work. Maybe one day I'll get my wireless meat thermometer probe. Maybe I won't. Still waiting. And that's fine if it fails, because I just lost on one small thing. But what happens when those bigger companies do acquire those smaller fish in the sea? Well, they start kind of consuming that mercury too. And so when you believe in a Nest, or you believe in an Apple, you believe in a Samsung, and they're buying up all these smaller devices, and you as the consumer are supporting those products, well, you're ingesting all that legacy assumptions that those companies made. Those startups, they don't have the time or the resources to really look at who is going to build this product. They're not doing research into understanding consumer segments. And so you have an isolated group of probably not diverse individuals making assumptions for an entire consumer audience. And so they make assumptions. And you at the very end of this, right, you're buying the product, you are absorbing all those assumptions that were made all along the way. And that's really hard, because it makes it very difficult to be an early adopter in the IoT space. It looks a lot like the early days of VHS cassettes, right? There was VHS and Betamax. And for those of you who don't remember that, there was Blu-ray and HD DVD. And for those of you who don't remember that either, Android versus iOS, Mac versus PC, you get it. We're in the midst of a platform war, and no one's really won it. So how do we get beyond the hype? Well, first of all, it's really simple. Let's find problems that actually need solving. Secondly, let's not get caught up in the Silicon Valley valuations. All these talk of unicorns and billion-dollar companies. It's just a light bulb. And thirdly, let's build an ecosystem. Let's recognize that individual startups aren't capable of solving every problem, but let's build a place, whether it's software, hardware, or other support, where companies can actually get together, support each other, and build products together. If only there was a place that didn't get caught up in the hype of Silicon Valley, that actually believed in solving real problems, and had an ecosystem that was way more collaborative and competitive. It's Portland. And I think that IoT actually needs Portland, because we look at things a little bit differently here. But I also think that Portland needs IoT. Economist Enrico Moretti wrote this amazing book called The New Geography of Job. And in it, he talks about the rise of innovation clusters in the country. and how cities can actually become a leader in a particular space, or they can basically dissolve, right? If you look at manufacturing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and you look at cities that have pivoted and adopted and others that have actually fallen. And he makes his quote, innovative firms have an incentive to locate near other innovative firms. Having good neighbors, even competitors, improves the creativity of companies and its workers. And he goes on to talk about how clusters can't afford to cling on to a failed industry or a declining industry, and instead, they need to leverage their unique strengths to reinvent themselves before the tipping point is reached, and the local ecosystem kind of enters a downward spiral. So if we look at Portland, what makes this city unique? Or put another way, what is it that makes Portland innovative? Well, first off, we're really good at apparel. In fact, all these apparel companies move here so that they can build upon the existing momentum that has been built over the last 30 years. So we've got established companies that are worth billions of dollars of annual revenue. We've got upstarts that are taking advantage of the fact that there's an ecosystem here and building their own companies here. We also have semiconductors and manufacturing and supporting industries. Autodesk, Intel, Mentor Graphics, Tektronix, Qualcomm. We've got the ability to make chips, the software to manage those processes. We love food. We're really good at food in Portland. This is Pine Street Market that features restaurants that are opening up kind of experimental takes on their already established restaurants. We've got EcoTrust that's looking at food supply, and .97 and Bamboo Sushi. We love our food in Portland, and we're really good at eating it. Thank you. And we're also really good at health. Cambia Health Solutions has their health startup incubator, OHSU, with the Knight Cancer Research Center, WebMD. We have a history of technology in the health space. And across all these industries, we work really, really hard, but we also like enjoying the great outdoors. And so here's a question for you, Portland. What if we reframed the conversation about connected devices and IoT to be a little bit less about connected devices and smart appliances and made it more about the energy that we consume via the food that we enjoy so much eating, how we spend that via the activities that we really want to do in the great outdoors, and how we use that energy and how we stay healthy while enjoying the natural beauty of the world. And what if it was less about the connected appliances or the Wi-Fi crockpot or the juicer, and what if those devices that made our homes smarter actually allowed us to get out a little bit more, enjoy the great outdoors, enjoy time being present in the now? What if each of these industries looked at how IoT, connected devices, or the rise of small sensors can make each of the consumer segments that they target a little bit smarter, and actually build products within their domain of expertise that actually gave them the insight to build products that people would actually use? And what if all of these came together in a way, each industry bringing together their domain expertise to build a product with the insight and the research and the understanding of those consumers? At the center of this is IoT. And in no other city in the country will you find this overlap of industries and passion for food, the outdoors, and just living. This is Portland. I think that Portland can own IoT. But I do think there's some challenges associated with that, though I think we can overcome them. So let's talk about some of the challenges. Well, first off, those industries don't generally talk to each other. When was the last time you went to a semiconductor meetup and bumped into someone from an apparel company? We also have a funding problem in Portland. Talk to any startup about how difficult it is to raise money, and you'll know that it's not as easy as saying, hey, I've got a really cool idea. And as a result, there's a lack of startups that are in this space here in Portland. And then the exits, right? In order to have a full ecosystem, you need to be able to go from a startup all the way to an exit and have the money to reinvest into other companies and to build and to keep kind of the momentum going. You can't have an innovation cluster if the startups just kind of sit and fizzle or get acquired by other companies in a different city and then they kind of move out of town. So let's look at cross-industry collaboration. It actually exists. It's just not well advertised. So this is the Southeast Innovation Quadrant as part of the City of Portland's 2030 plan. They imagine this world where OHSU, PSU, kind of the Zidell Yards by the waterfront, OMSI, and PCC are all connected via mass transit. And across them are companies, the opportunity to build campuses where companies can come together across different industries. You have OHSU representing health, you have OMSI representing science, you've got PSU representing some of the business side, and PCC with some of the supplies and IoT lab that they have going. And so this is an active conversation right now where people have an opportunity to actually shape what the next 20 years of this city looks like. Something that we've been a part of recently is this new organization called the Portland Modern Manufacturing Collective. And what we're trying to do with the PMMC is actually bring together companies that are similarly aligned in the IoT space. And we want to help companies, whether it's a startup or a fully fledged business, with the knowledge, equipment, and mentorship required to bring digitally enabled products to market. And conveniently, we're all located in Portland's Central East Side, so we imagine this world where you can have an idea for an IoT startup. You can go to a company like Central Office and actually get set up with an office space or use their lab. You can work with a VC fund like Elevate Capital, bring on the expertise of the Portland Incubator Experiment and Portland's ultimate connector, Rick Tarosi, and work with companies like Regato and Uncork Studios to imagine your products and see them built, all within walking distance of each other, so you don't have to get onto Highway 26. It's a personal goal of mine. So where are the startups? So of the 2,111 startups that are self-ascribed IoT startups on AngelList, only 6 are in Portland. And so while those companies are each unique in their space, they're trying to build products in IoT, we still have a ways to go. And we need to recruit and build those companies that align to those industries that we've talked about. What about the money? Well, while startups complain about the access to funding here in Portland, we actually have quite a few VC funds and programs available to companies that are looking to raise money. Elevate Capital, Oregon Angel Fund, Oregon Best, PSF, Rogue Venture Partners, Startup PDX Challenge, which is the PDC's effort, Thai Angels, Voyager, and so on. So there is money. It's certainly not at the same scale of what you might see in San Francisco, but we're smarter about how we use money, and it's way cheaper to live here than it is in San Francisco. But what about the exits? We all want to be part of the 3 Comma Club. Well, those haven't happened yet. And we need to cultivate those companies in order that they can get acquired and reinvest the money. But I think it'll happen if these industries come together to actually build products that have purpose and do so with an expertise in those industrial spaces. So Portland, my ask of you is let's build this. It's still early enough in the IoT space. We don't have to worry about any one city having emerged as the owner of IoT. And no city has an apparel industry, a food industry, a semiconductor industry, and a passion for the outdoors, and an ability to not get caught up in the hype of everywhere else in the way that Portland does. So let's bring together industries and forces in a collaborative way, which is another thing that Portland's really great at. Because we're not competitive. If you succeed, I succeed, the city succeeds, we all succeed. And let's get a little bit better about talking about ourselves. I know that we're worried about California moving up here. It's not the end of the world, especially if we recruit companies that align to our values, align to the industries that we have, our insight and our knowledge. It's okay to get bigger, so long as we do it our way. If you want to be a part of this, let's talk. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So I'm Malia Spencer. I am a reporter with the Portland Business Journal, and I also edit our twice weekly Tech Flash newsletter, which everybody here should sign up for, so that's my shameless plug. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more, Mars. So you talk about how IoT needs Portland, Portland needs IoT, and we've got a few startups here that are working in this space, but money's hard to raise, and I'm wondering, why haven't these Portland companies been able to attract the same kind of capital that's going to these other ecosystems?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a twofold problem. I think it's really easy for companies to move to the Bay Area because it feels like you can walk in anywhere and get money. And I think that while our country was riding a bull market, it was really easy just to go into San Francisco and say, hey, I've got my startup, I want to base it here. But as 2016 got started off a little bit on a financial bump, I think both VCs and companies have started looking at fundraising a little bit more just more nuance. Like, do we really need to be in San Francisco? Do we really need to pay for rent in the city, or support six-figure salaries for people who are just getting started? And so I think people are going to take a closer look at Portland based on what we have. And so I think while historically that has been true, I think that over the next 18 to 24 months it's going to change.
How do we tell that story? I mean, you mentioned it, that we got to be better about talking about ourselves, and so I'm wondering, like, what kind of areas do you see improvement needed?
Sure. Well, Portland also has great storytellers. We have great brand builders, tremendous agencies that are remarkable at telling compelling stories of products that others have built. I think we need to go on a focused campaign, not just to bring people here for travel reasons, but to tell them about the startup ecosystem that exists. That means getting outside of Portland. This is great that this exists in Portland, but we should get out and tell the stories about Portland and other cities.
Okay. You also talked a little bit about the fragmented ecosystem that's out there, and I'm wondering, what is it going to take to get beyond the hype and beyond our inevitable trough of disillusionment, which is my favorite description of anything. Who's going to do that? Is it going to be a big company? Is it going to be a startup? Who do you see kind of emerging as the one to sort of save it?
That's a tricky one. I think it's going to be a small company that gets bought by the right big company. Because I don't think that any startup in the IoT space has the financial resources to scale to a point where it's going to make an impact on this space. They need a Google, they need an Apple, they need a Samsung to get to that scale. But the culture needs to be that of a startup. They need to be looking at a very focused problem, and they need to solve it well. The Nest, I think, came close as the thermostat, but it hasn't hit the scale I think that anyone would have hoped.
Do you think a current big company exists that kind of fits that, or is it going to be some sort of a new emerging big company? I guess I don't know how you.
I think it might be a surprising company. I don't think it. I think it would surprise everyone if it was like a GE, like if GE suddenly nailed it on IoT, and we're like, oh, GE, who knew?
All right. I also had another one about. We got in this a little bit with the Nest discussion earlier and touched on it a little, but I'm wondering, how does the benefit of IoT kind of trickle down to everybody in terms of this not just being something for people who can afford the device, the connection, the resources to put it all together?
Sure. I think it's a combination of things. I think one is the Nest at scale, or products like that at scale, bring down the cost. Mm-hmm. Insurance companies and other companies subsidizing products make it more accessible to people. At some point, the value of having connected devices is something that pays for itself with the insight and the value that you would get from having those products in your home.
All right, and I think we might have time for one question from the audience if anybody's got something.
First, I want to say I have the crock pot, and it's life-changing. But in regards to the technologies that are out there enabling IoT, so in your opinion, what I'm wondering is, are there going to be companies out there that can get to the level that you're talking about in enabling IoT, yet still remain independent, be able to make it to IPO? And the second part of that is, how important does ownership of the data play into that discussion? Because now, does CenturyLink know my recipe for really great pulled pork? I'm making it in that crock pot, and is that going to get out there?
I think we need to answer the second question first, I think we need to get over our fears of the data. The data's already out there. It's on your phone. It's just taking the data off your phone just in a different way. And I say this as a person who's very protective of my data, but they already know, right? Which is scary. But I think when you let go of that immediate fear and wonder, whether it's health tech or how can lots of data points, maybe less about what's in your crock pot, but more about the picture of health of your family and calorie intake and predictive analysis of how food consumption might lead to less incidences of diabetes in certain parts of the country, then I think we'll see the value proposition for that. In terms of independent companies being able to IPO, I mean, hardware is expensive and it's hard, and so I think companies would need to have quite a bit of financial resources at their disposal in order to kind of carry that through, and that means shipping product on time so they can actually generate revenues on time. And I think the hardware delays are one of those challenges of IoT that we haven't really overcome, if Kickstarter's any indication, that I think we need to improve upon before independence can kind of rise and kind of see that full spread.
All right, well, I think we got to end it there, so thank you very much.
Thank you.